Welcome again to another superhero showdown on Grudge Match, the show that poses the question, who would be left standing if characters from opposite ends of the comic divide put themselves to the test against one another? Today's matchup pairs off the two characters who make use of size alteration and their considerable intellects to be two of the most enduring heroes in comics. From DC, it's the diminutive Justice Leaguer, the Atom, and from Marvel, size-altering Avenger, Ant-Man. Taking a look at the Atom first, Raymond Palmer was first created in October of 1961. He was a physicist, and he holds a PhD in physics, and he became a superhero when he discovered a fragment of a white dwarf had fallen to Earth, and he figured out how to use that to shrink anything down to microscopic size, but it had a fatal flaw. Anything he shrunk down would become unstable and would then explode moments after shrinking it. Eventually, he was forced into a situation where he would die if he didn't use this on himself, so he shrunk himself down, expecting that it would then kill him afterward, but he managed to survive it. It's believed that he possesses a metagene that allows him to be stable in a smaller form even when nothing else that shrinks down happens to be. So he then took this shrinking technique, built it into his suit so that he could shrink down at will, and used it to become an adventurer and a superhero, and eventually went on to join the Justice League. Ant-Man, also known as Hank Pym, was created just 3 months after the Atom was, in January of 1962. He is very notable for being a founding member of the Avengers. He was a member of the Avengers even before Captain America was ever a member of the Avengers. And he is one of the foremost scientific geniuses of the Marvel Universe, having multiple masteries in various scientific fields, which puts him on the same level of genius as people like Reed Richards, Tony Stark, or Bruce Banner. And his most famous accomplishment was discovering what was known as Pym particles. It's a microscopic particle that allows him to shrink anything or grow anything as large or as small as he wants it to be. And he most notably used this on himself to, at first, only shrink himself down, but then he reverse engineered the process and figured out how to grow himself to gigantic proportions. Now, while both of these characters have a lot in common in terms of the way they first developed their powers, and, of course, both being geniuses of the highest order, they have a few critical differences as well. Something that differentiates the Atom is that even though he can only shrink down rather than grow the way Ant-Man can, he also has the ability to control his mass in a way that Ant-Man cannot. Even when at normal size, he can shift the entire mass of his body into one specific part of his body, or eliminate the mass virtually entirely. So even though he remains at full size, he becomes incredibly light, and this has actually granted him the ability to glide or appear to fly over small distances because he eliminates the entire mass from his body. And he can also channel the entire mass of his body down into his fists, which allow him to have what appears to be a superhuman level of strength, particularly when punching objects. He can punch through heavy and solid objects because he channels the entire mass of his body into his fists, and it allows him to have a very powerful punch. Additionally, he's found a lot of really interesting ways to utilize his power of being able to shrink, such as being able to dial up a number on a telephone, shrink himself down, hop into the receiver, and then ride the telephone call to his destination. And if you think of how fast a telephone call gets connected, he can move from one end of the country to the other in a matter of seconds by placing a long-distance phone call. Downside of that is that it can't travel overseas, or it can't travel through cellular phone connections. It has to be a landline connection. But that's still a very inventive way of utilizing small stature in order to travel at a very advanced rate. Additionally, when you think of the fact that in the DC universe, when anything shrinks other than the Atom, it has a tendency to explode. If the Atom is using it properly, this could give him a sort of unlimited supply of weaponry. Anything he happened to grab that he could shrink down and then throw would essentially become like a hand grenade. takes a basketball, shrinks it down to roughly the size of a grapefruit, and then throws it, it'll then explode. And the explosive potential of objects were dependent on their original size, so if he shrunk a car down a little bit, it would explode a good deal more than, say, shrinking a baseball or basketball. So this does give him a wide array of things that he can use to throw and use as sort of explosive weapons at any given moment. Some critical differences that Hank Pym, Ant-Man, has in his corner is, of course, not only can he shrink in the same way that Ray Palmer can, but he also reversed the process and was able to grow to virtually any size he wished. His ability to grow had no limit to it, so he could expand himself until he broke into what was known as the macroverse. This means that he got so huge that he pretty much moved to another state of being. He broke into another reality altogether that was known as the macroverse, and on this level of existence, he could converse with universal abstracts like eternity and infinity, who existed on this higher plane. And of course, he could also shrink himself down into what was known as the microverse, which is an entire universe that lives in single cells, and he had many adventures doing that. Something that Ray Palmer also did, could shrink himself down to a microverse level and had adventures in micro-universes. But not only can Hank Pym grow and shrink himself, but he can also do that to other objects, anything he wishes. Unlike in the DC Universe and the Marvel Universe, when things shrink, they don't explode. So he utilizes this in a lot of interesting ways. Most often, he has a tool belt right on his hip that seems really small, but he actually has hundreds, potentially even thousands, of tools and weaponry in it at all times, and he has them all shrunk down. And at any given moment, he can pop any one of them out. They are mentally commanded by a chip that he's inserted in his head, so he can pull out any kind of tool or weapon he needs at any given situation, and he has virtually an unlimited supply within his tool belt. A problem that Hank Pym has, however, is that he tends to be a bit mentally unstable from time to time. In the past, he's had severe problems with alcoholism, he's had spousal abuse problems with his one-time wife, Janet Van Dyne, also known as the Wasp, and this has caused severe problems in his psyche that has almost led to a bit of a split personality that he's had over the years. But in most recent comics, he's rediscovered his confidence and rediscovered his heroic aptitude and seems to be much more stable than he was in his past. So having taken a look at these characters' differences and similarities, it's time now to determine a winner. That winner's going to be Ant-Man. Hank Pym walks away victorious in this fight, whereas he does have the ability to grow to superhuman size, and on first glance that would seem to be the clear thing that gives him an advantage. When the atom shrinks down to microscopic size and the Ant-Man grows to superhuman sizes, that basically makes the atom untouchable. So it's not Hank Pym's ability to grow to superhuman size that makes him the winner. What makes him the winner is his ability to shrink down other things and bring them with him into the fight. Having a virtually unlimited supply of weaponry and tools for any given situation at his command at any time gives Hank Pym a very clear advantage in this fight. Additionally, his scientific command of many different masteries in the scientific fields gives him an advantage as well, because it allows him to think of more creative ways out of any given situation and fight, whereas Ray Palmer, the Atom, has a high degree of intelligence when it comes to physics. He doesn't have a mastery in as many different areas as Hank Pym does. So based on those advantages, the versatility of being able to shrink down and bring other tools and weaponry into the fight, as well as a higher degree of intelligence and mastery in more fields than the Atom has, gives Hank Pym the advantage and the win in this grudge match. So message me down below, let me know what you think of the outcome of this fight, and any suggestions for upcoming episodes. We'll see you next time on the next edition of Grudge Match.